few minutes. Okay, well, it is 12:01 on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome again to the USDA Farm to School Grant for the 2024 fiscal school year. Presenters today are Allie Bell from the USDA Mountain Plains Regional Office. We also have Sarah Smith from the Nebraska Department of Education, the Farm to School Specialist. Next slide, please. The agenda today, we're going to be covering Farm to School basics, the overview of Farm to School grant program, why you should apply. We're going to be having a guest speaker from the Center for Rural Affairs, and then how to apply with questions and resources.
I can take it from here, Taylor. Thank you so much for the introduction. Taylor Schorsch is a nutrition services specialist at the Nebraska Department of Education and is a good resource for those involved in child nutrition programs and is a good point of reference for farm to school and child nutrition programs. So you are welcome to drop any questions in the chat box as we move forward. We'll definitely have time at the end for any questions. And if we catch them while we're presenting, we'll address them as we go as well. So to introduce this concept for you all that are joining the call today, we have lots of folks joining. We'll be recording as well and sharing this out at the end. But from the registration list that I'm seeing, we have a lot of interest from potential partners across the state, even outside of school districts, from producers, from extension, from child nutrition program operators. So we just want to make sure that we're giving you some good ideas on how a farm to school grant can potentially fit into the goals that you would have for farm to school in your community for Nebraska. So farm to school is certainly fairly unique, and it's not always that easy for defining it. But we're going to talk about a couple of the definitions that are widely accepted nationwide. Vermont Feed is an organization housed in Vermont, but out in the Northeast, and they're really a pioneering champion for farm to school in the country. And they define farm to school as a comprehensive strategy that connects student learning and experiences in the classroom, the cafeteria, and the community. And so you'll hear frequently a reference to the 3 C's of farm to school. And we use this as well in Nebraska. So we're really looking at how you can have stronger farm to school programs when you're integrating local food into classroom learning. You're featuring it in cafeteria meals, and you're bringing that community together with the school itself. So you can see here some photos from Nebraska where we've really embraced the idea of the 3 C's. In 2020, the Nebraska Department of Education partnered with Nebraska Extension and applied for a USDA Farm to School grant. And we were awarded to implement this 3 C's model in our state with a Farm to School Institute. And so that institute is based off of the 3 C's model, and it's an evidence-based framework designed by Vermont Feed and their partners to really integrate farm to school across all these different areas, making it more sustainable and more likely to move forward. So you can see in 2021, we offered our institute virtually due to the pandemic, but we brought on 8 school teams who focus on action plans and goals that involved all 3 of these C's. So not just the cafeteria, but also goals for the community, the classroom, and then ongoing staying power to sustain that activity beyond the year that they were involved in that institute. We're continuing with this model, and currently the Nebraska Department of Education and partners are working with Missouri and Kansas Departments of Education to offer Heartland Farm to School Institute in the next 3 years. And so it's a great model, again, because of the way that it sustains farm to school by looking at these different touch points and levers to reach students. And then nationally, the National Farm to School Network is a national nonprofit that does exactly what its title is. It builds a network across our country for folks to have resources on farm to school materials and best practices, as well as they focus on policy and programmatic things as well. So at USDA, they also use this definition where you have these three elements where we're looking at local procurement. We're talking about hands-on education, experiential learning, which could be in the form of taste tests or on-farm education, where you're visiting the farms or farmers markets, or the farms are coming into the school and doing hands-on learning there. And also that on-site garden education. We have a lot of agriculture education in our state with greenhouses. So you can see gardens growing in greenhouses, hydroponics, container gardening, outdoor gardens that are doing salsa gardens, tribal gardens, so all kinds of things there. But the more that you see activity in any one of these three elements combined, again, the stronger and more integrated those programs are for sustaining and continuing with the highest level of benefit. So in Nebraska, a good way to look at a program that connects these three elements and even the three C's is with the Harvest of the Month program that's hosted by the Nebraska Department of Education, where you see materials that are ready to integrate into classrooms. And there's an expansion program right now for early childhood. And there's materials developed in partnership with the Center for Rural Affairs with the Indigenous Foods pieces for Harvest of the Month. So this is where it's not solely about promotion or integration of recipes in the cafeteria, but that's certainly part of the farm to school movement. But also where are we teaching it in the classrooms and outside of the classrooms, providing opportunities to engage with that community. So Allie Bell will be talking a little bit more about where Native Farm to School funding, what it might look like with the USDA Farm to School grant funding. But just a note that Native Farm to School might look a little bit different than the typical definition of the three elements of procurement, education, and gardens, because there's a different cultural background for the tribal nations. And so we can see here that the First Nations Development Institute has defined Native Farm to School rather with a focus on these 6 levers where you're engaging with the community that exists within the tribal area. You're looking at the traditional foodways, whether it's foraging or bison or where their foodways are originating from. They're engaging with traditional knowledge and elders, traditional foods, indigenous foods, language and traditional language, and then and a focus on land stewardship and environmentalism. So it'll look a little bit different depending on a cultural lens that you're looking through across the state. And a good example of that would be tribal nations. And so just to look here at a couple of the different schools that have shared some photos and some stories with Nebraska about their farm to school programs. You see this picture on the left of Omaha Nation Public School. They have high school students very engaged in several acres of tribal land that they are right there at their school district growing the food and bringing it into the cafeteria. And then they have elementary students working in cultural gardens. You can see a picture here that the Center for Rural Affairs provided us from East Santee, where they were doing an Indigenous foods workshop. So there's pretty incredible things happening in our tribal areas as well. When we talk about farm to school and we're looking at the cafeteria side of things and that plate, there's not one focus area. We're not just talking about produce. We're not just talking about a protein. We're talking about all of the foods that span that meal tray. So we are talking about vegetables. We're talking about fruit. We're talking about fruit and vegetable bars. We could be talking about dairy, grains, dry edible beans or pulses, flours, meat, poultry, and fish. And so another program in Nebraska that helps address the local on the tray would be Nebraska Thursdays. And just a high point here that this was funded, again, this program was funded by USDA Farm to School grant funds in fiscal year 17. And so just a picture here of a very local tray from Litchfield Public School. Everything on this tray was local except the grapes, I believe, where you have some dry edible beans that were local. Their salad greens were grown on site in their greenhouse, pumpkin bread, and their dairy was local. You can see a couple of other schools that have been really successful in bringing local in. Meat that Lincoln Public Schools was using just in October of this year for homemade meatloaf came from Rake's Beef in Ashland. Pius X there works directly with Green School Farms, and Judy Pullman from Wayne Community Schools does a great job with sourcing local beef and products from her area around Wayne and Norfolk. So Nebraska Thursdays helps promote that local food. And it's important to recognize that at the national level with USDA, as well as at the state level, that there is no defined set of activities or a checklist or a program to sign up for when it comes to farm to school. It's not required at the school level. It's encouraged and not required. And it's not going to look the same in any individual community. So out west, farm to school goals might look a little bit different as they would in the southeast part of the state. And it's going to reflect the values and the strengths, those assets that exist in the different parts of our state. Again, it's a very wide range of activities. It might have to do with aggregation or distribution of product or processing. It might have to do with education promotion and nutrition promotion. So it's really wide. And again, it's a priority for the current administration, and it's a priority at the state level as well. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over so we can learn more about the specifics of the grant program to Allie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here with all of you today. I'm Allie Bell. I'm one of two farm to school specialists here in our Mountain Plains region. And really excited to see that there are so many of you interested in farm to school in Nebraska. Nebraska has such a great reputation for outstanding programming in farm to school. And there's, so many great things that can be incorporated depending on where you are in the state and what's important to your community. That last slide that Sarah went over, I think is so important because folks so often get hung up on even USD, like there in the corner of my slide, it says the Patrick Leahy Farm to School program. Program kind of implicates that you need to sign up for something or you need to check a box, but that's really not the case. Farm to School is more really a set of values, what's important in your community, and it could look very different depending on what part of the state you're in, what part of the country you're in. So I think it's a really exciting thing to be able to build out and work around because it brings folks together and it really allows communities, organizations, schools to show what's important to them. So we're going to go over a couple of the nuts and bolts of this grant program and what actually gets funded. And then you're going to hear from Kirsten, who is one of our current grantees and former grantees, to get a little on the ground perspective, but I'll go over a couple slides and then pass it off to her. And then we'll come back to me for a couple more nuts and bolts. So here on the slide, you'll see some of the child nutrition programs that the USDA runs. This is important because while nonprofits are eligible and encouraged to apply for this grant program as are producers, but an important kind of benchmark or pillar of the grant program is a letter of support if you are not a school or daycare that participates in one of the USDA feeding programs, that you have a letter of support from one of these programs or from a state agency that administers one of these programs. So these programs are the National School Lunch Program, the School Breakfast Program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and the Summer Food Service Program. When we like this grant program is called the Farm to School grant program. We talk about farm to school, but really when we talk about farm to school, we're talking about so much more, right? Farm to ECE or early child care, farm to native farm to school, farm to plate, farm to fork. Depending on your community, you might have a different way that you phrase this. And here at USDA, we say farm to school just because it's easy frankly, but there's a lot more to it, right? And use the terminology that resonates with you, but and then know that our grant program funds more than just schools. It's a vast and wide, so just something to keep in mind. So what does this program actually fund? What kind of projects? Let's take a look at some of the things that the money from this grant program can go towards. Let's go on to that next slide. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, so please don't think that. Also, just as a note, you'll see that apple with that random number 2.4 up in the corner. The 2.4 actually references the section of the request for applications, the RFA, where more information about allowable costs exists. So in section 2.4 of the RFA, that will be the allowable cost section. So if you see a weird number in the corner of any of my slides, that's what that is referring to. So just an example of some of the allowable costs that come with this grant, like this grant program can cover salaries. If you want to hire a farm to school coordinator, a procurement specialist, if you want to contract out with your local extension agency or with another nonprofit that has expertise in a certain project area that you're interested in, this grant can cover salaries. That's a really big thing that it does cover. And that includes both salaries and then kind of those fringe costs too of healthcare and benefits and whatnot. Supplies, you know, if you've got a grand project idea for building out a garden or a greenhouse or doing some neat programming that, you know, requires maybe some new knives or other kitchen utensils, this grant program can cover that. Travel for your employees. There is some required travel as part of this grant program to come to what we call our grantee gathering. But then also for other trainings or conferences, rental fees. So there's a lot of different things. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but just to get those juices flowing of, you know, maybe if you've got a project rumbling around in your brain or something you've talked about in your community, these are some examples. Let's go on to the next slide. So who is eligible as a lead applicant? A lot of folks and organizations are eligible for this. And again, this is in section 3.1. This eligibility section is really important, so be sure you read it carefully. But schools and institutions that are administering those child nutrition programs, state agencies, local agencies, nonprofits. Nonprofits are a huge part of who we fund. Groups of producers or agricultural producers, and Indian tribal organizations. So a lot of different entities are eligible to be that lead applicant. Let's go into that. Yeah, next slide. Awesome. But who is not eligible as a lead applicant? Individuals. You can't just apply as Jane Doe, you know, I have a great project for my community. That's great, but you need to find that organization that can be the lead applicant. Institutions of higher learning, like colleges and universities, extension agencies cannot be the lead applicant, hospitals and hospital foundations. But a lot of these folks or these organizations can be contracted and they can be key partners in an application. So if you work with an extension agency, a lot of extension agencies have been really key partners in a lot of farm to school grants because they know their communities well. They're out there doing this work on the ground. They just can't be that lead applicant.
Allie, before you move on, there's a question that fits in well here. Can you clarify that childcares or preschools, what allows them to be eligible, and can they be for profit?
They can be for profit. Please read the eligibility section really carefully. But as long as you are running one of those child nutrition programs, but again, please read section 3. There are some caveats around this, but yes, you can be for profit. You do need to be running one of our USDA feeding programs. So please read that over carefully. But yeah, we encourage ECEs to apply and are excited that this is a growing field within the kind of the greater farm to school movement. All right, I am now going to pass it over to Kirsten Bailey from the Center for Rural Affairs, an all-star grantee. She's going to tell you a little bit more about their experience.
Thanks, Allie. Thanks, everybody. We can go on to the next slide, Sarah. So, like Allie said, my name is Kirsten Bailey. I work at the Center for Rural Affairs. I'm a senior project associate. I'm also a beekeeper and a vegetable farmer. So I've been vegetable farming for, well, 10 years or so, and beekeeping for about 8. Next slide. Like I stated, I work with the Center for Rural Affairs. So we have been a nonprofit for 50 years. So this is our 50th year anniversary. So we've been having a lot of fun celebrations around that. And our overall mission is to create healthy, vibrant rural communities. Next slide. This is a map of the schools that we worked with our first greenhouse to cafeteria grant. We have a second one now that's focused on FFA, and I haven't updated with the schools, but you can see that we kind of had a statewide approach to working with schools to get their greenhouses up and producing in a more substantial way. Next slide. These are some pictures from that project. I would meet throughout our work, we would meet with FFA teachers who would have these greenhouses, and they knew that they could be productive and they wanted them to be more productive, but they weren't entirely sure how to go about that. So we offered technical assistance with growing, pest control, soil amendments, and improving the soil quality, and also kind of changing the way that they were growing from, you know, kind of a one-off, like, let's try a little bit of this, let's try a little bit of that, to having an actual production plan based around the school year rather than the growing year, since they had these high tunnels and greenhouses that could let them produce year round. Next slide. So just a little bit more about our 2 grants. We really are focusing with partnering with the FFAs. We started about 8 years ago, and we're continuing to build our program to address common problems and also reoccurring goals that schools would bring up to us. We have now started working with FFA on a statewide level and at the state level. So we work with the people who are coworkers of Sarah's at the NDE to get the word out and impact more schools. Currently, we're recruiting for our second Farm to School grant award. So we're looking for 6 schools to participate with us to focus on specialty crop production. And then 2 years ago, we created the Greenhouse to Cafeteria Award, and we've given that out to 2 schools, both located in Central City. So I want to talk a little bit about our grant process and how we kind of started working in this sphere. So like I said, in our work, we'd come across mostly FFA teachers who kept talking to us about this need. So we identified a need based on what's coming up in our work. We then would talk to some partners to see if there was somebody else doing the work that could help the schools, or if we needed to get involved. So at that point, we decided that we could get involved, and based on my past experience as a vegetable producer, I kind of knew how to talk to the schools about production and production plans. We then talked for the second one, we talked to current participants, we talked to past participants, and again, we met with our partners to come up with a plan and a goal to see if it was going to meet what we needed to. We also talked about what we could do, where is our expertise, and who else would need to be involved to address this issue. Sometimes, often, we're not the best people to address the issues that we're seeing, so we want to pull in those people who are the experts. We created a logic model, and we do that for every idea we have. No matter what the funder is, we want to have a plan, and we want to make sure we have like our ducks in a row and that it makes sense. If we have time, we might talk to the farm to school staff at the state and regional level. So sometimes it's great to get their feedback, or if we have a question about what's allowed, what isn't allowed, that's when we go to them with that. And then we also aim to submit early. In a lot of these cases, the website could crash, and if you miss the cutoff, you miss the cutoff. So we try to get in there early. That way, if there's anything that we need to fix, that we can as well. Next slide. This was the toolkit that we created for our first Greenhouse to Cafeteria award. It's still being used. We still have requests for it, so we still send it to people. And it kind of goes through these different things here, how to get involved with farm to school, specifically through production and the greenhouse. Obviously, that was our Greenhouse to Cafeteria award. Next slide. Here's just some of the lessons we learned through the past so many years of working with the farm to school and having the awards. The things that we really like is we were able to provide the schools with mini grants for purchases. Most schools spend about $500 to get their programs producing more food and consistent produce. We offer up to $2,000 to get that done. Having a team is key both for this grant and our success as a grantee, but also for the schools. And we look at partners as being the greatest asset. So we want to bring in people to help us get our work done. We document everything. Staff turnover is a real problem, both with our partners at the center, but also at the schools. And so many things have gotten lost, and so much of the information has gotten lost. And that's why sometimes you'll see a lot of these greenhouses sitting empty, is that they, since it started, maybe 4 or 5 different ag teachers have been at the school. Start small, both if you're going for a grant for the first time, but also go for those easy wins. We like to build those in. So what are some immediate things that you can do? And then what are some more long-term goals? For the schools, we like to use lettuce because you can turn it over pretty quickly and have them grow lettuce. And then they're seeing that as an easy win and as a quick started thing. And then you can introduce more time-intensive vegetables. And then lean on the farm to school staff, both on the state and regional levels, and go to the gatherings, like Allie talked about the grantee gathering, ready to make connections and follow up if there's an idea that you like. So we were able to meet as a region, and so we met with other people in our, is it 8 states, Allie? I can't remember, 8-state region. And we were able to kind of talk about their projects, what they were seeing, what they were doing. And then after the meeting, I met with a couple of them just one-on-one on our own to talk more about our projects and kind of how we could help each other and support each other and what we can learn from each other. So it's really valuable to know who's in your region who also has the grants. And then I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kirsten. So valuable to hear from your real life experience with this grant. So I'm going to go back to a couple more of the nuts and bolts now on the Farm to School grant program. So when you decide that you want to apply to the grant program, you need to choose a grant track. And so one of the grant tracks we have is what we call our turnkey track. And this is really for applicants that it's a bit of a simplified application because USDA outlines the activities and the objectives that you'll accomplish over the course of your project. So you can see within the turnkey grant track, there are kind of 3 minier subdivisions of this track. The action planning, which is, as it sounds, you would develop a farm to school action plan. I think that this one is really great, especially for maybe schools, communities, producers that haven't maybe been involved in a farm to school project, but they have a great idea. You have a great idea that you want to develop. This can provide that funding for kind of that staff time to develop a plan. Well-developed plans take time and they take inputs. So I think that that's a great track. Edible gardens, this is kind of a classic farm to school activity. But if your daycare site, if your school wants gardens, this is some great funding to be able to build those, raised beds or grow towers, a lot of different options with the edible garden track. And then the agricultural education, is kind of that integration of farm to school topics into CNP sites curriculum. You'll notice on this slide that there's CNP operator and CNP sites. CNP is just, again, those child nutrition programs. So not just referring to schools, but any host of sites that might run the National School Lunch Program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the Summer Food Service Program. So that's what that acronym is. Okay, so outside of the turnkey that has kind of its 3 other subdivisions, we have the implementation and state agency grant tracks. The state agency track is just as it sounds, that only state agencies are eligible to apply for that. So you're like departments of ed, departments of ag. So if you're not a state agency, you can't apply to that one, but the implementation grant track has the same objective of improving access to local foods and eligible CNP sites through a whole host of programming. So the great thing about an implementation grant is that you have a lot more flexibility. This is for more of a kind of flushed out project. If you have more of a comprehensive idea, you already have partners in line, you've got your idea, or maybe you've already been doing this work and you just need to get some more funding to keep it going, or kind of get it off the ground. The implementation grant allows for more of that kind of autonomy in terms of how you design your project when you're applying. So it also has more money attached to it, as you'll see in the next slide. But let's see. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So with these different tracks, the turnkey, since those are simpler projects that have predefined activities, you can apply for up to $50,000 with the turnkey track. With the implementation, that is for $50,000 to $100,000, as well as the state agency. There are a couple caveats here. You can actually apply for, so I'm sorry, under the state agency, it does say $500,000. And the implementation grants can also be $500,000 if you have a multi-state project. So if you're bringing in partners from different states, or maybe your organization works across state lines. This year, we have an organization that is based in Colorado, but they run Head Start programs in Florida and Indiana and Colorado. So they were able to apply for above that $100,000 threshold. Also, new this year, Indian tribal organizations can apply for up to $500,000. And they do not need to have a project that goes across state lines. It can just be within one state, it can be within one organization, but if they have a project that warrants $500,000, they can apply for up to that amount. So that is something to be sure that you read through in the RFA, but those are exciting changes this year. The period of performance. Maybe you've been a grantee in past years. We used to have a 12-month period of performance, but found that for most folks that wasn't quite enough time. So we've just made now the period of performance is 24 months for all grant projects. And usually that's because by the time you get the notice, we don't send out notices until July, and then our grantee gathering is in September. And the school year or the planting season or whatever is getting started. We found that 12 months just didn't cut it for most folks. So the period of performance of the grant, or the life of a grant, is now 2 years. So you will be notified if you are awarded come July, and then through the next June 30th, 2 years out, will be how long you have to expend your funds and run your project. All right. So a couple little things on how to apply. I am not going to go in depth here. In a couple slides, we'll be dropping in a link to some webinars that our national office did, and those were pretty technical. The great thing is that they were recorded, so you can press pause, you can rewind, you can come back and watch them. But those webinars really go in depth with all of these different steps. Really what I wanted to show here is this grant is due January 12th. Do not wait until January 11th to decide that you want to apply. It is a federal grant. It is bureaucratic. There are a lot of steps. So, start earlier, and then you can go back to these resources. You can talk with your partners, make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. So just this is more an overview that there are a few different systems that you'll need to get into to apply to this grant. So again, don't wait until January 11th. The date today is November 15th. So almost still 2 months to apply to this grant. So it's a great thing. You can save your work and come back. But just want to illustrate that.
I have a question really quick.
Yeah.
On number 3, where it said, sorry, I don't know if we can go back, but it was like, yeah, e-business point of contact, e-business POC. I wasn't sure what that means, or is that just like the role of owner? Or if you could just elaborate on that. Just haven't seen that one before.
Yeah, and so that will also be in the webinars that our national office did. They go into this, but yeah, that's just another
okay.
point. Yeah, that is and that's just kind of another check mark along the grants.gov road. But yes, we'll drop the links to those webinars in here in just a minute. But yeah, be sure to watch. Absolutely. All right. So yeah, here is the link. And I think Sarah is going to drop that link in the chat. So there were 2 different webinars that our national office did about 2 weeks ago. What the first webinar is posted now on the website at that link that she'll put in there. So you can watch that. So yeah, please do. And they are no more than an hour each. So they're not super long or anything. But the second one should be posted by the end of this week. So, and in that same place. So just be sure you're keeping an eye out on this link. That's a good one to just maybe bookmark, save it somewhere so you can come back to it. Some of our website things are a little bit layered and difficult sometimes to find your way around in. So yeah, I would bookmark this or save this link somewhere where you can come back to it and find it. All right. And then a couple of really important resources here. Let's see. I think Sarah's going to be dropping all of those links in the chat. So that first page, and I think I'm going to share screen now, Sarah. Is that okay? And I'm going to go through a couple of these links because they are these will kind of be your best friends here if you have interest in applying to this grant program. So let's see here. All right. So this was that first link, that resources page. And this one, so the webinar is there. You'll see that first webinar is posted right there. The second webinar should get posted by the end of the week right here too, so that you can watch both of those at your leisure. There's a couple other resources here that just kind of talk more broadly about our grant program. Summary of grant awards. I think that one of the Sarahs had dropped that link in previously into the chat, but you can see, let's just click on it. Why don't we click on it and see? You can see from 2013 when we started awarding this grant, you can look through all of the awardees. So maybe you're wondering what kind of daycares have been awarded in the past, or what kind of ECE projects. And so you can look through these lists. I think they're super helpful, and they include every project across the nation. And I think it's really helpful to use like the Control F function, and then maybe look up early child. Let's see, that only gets us two hits from this particular year, but this is a good way to look through. Or if you're a producer, or if you are looking at gardens, that's just a good way to look through the projects that might pertain to yours, and you can kind of see what's been funded in the past. So I really like these previous awardee packages. Let's see here, and then I think no. Application materials, and I think actually up here, this will just give you some more information about the RFA worth reading through. But here is the grants.gov link. I think that maybe someone from Nebraska also dropped that in the chat. But if you've never been on grants.gov before, it can be a little bit intimidating and a little bit confusing. So I just wanted to show you all this. This is the grant opportunity right here, fiscal year 2024 Farm to School grant. This is the synopsis here, but where you're going to want to go if you want to apply to this grant program, you go into related documents, and there's a lot of resources there. There are, a couple different things required for this grant, like match letter, commitments of match, things like that. And there's examples here and templates that you can use. But I wanted to point out two of the most important documents. This last one is the RFA, the request for application. So this is the big important document that has information on eligibility and the grant tracks and what's required in your application. So this RFA document is really important. Another one that's really important is the FAQ, the frequently asked questions. There are a lot of really good things that you might be wondering. The most commonly asked questions are in that FAQ document, and that's a really good one to look over, especially when you're considering eligibility to this grant program. I would highly recommend looking at both of those. Those are very, very important. So just wanted to share those few things. I think, Sarah, thank you for dropping those links in. So there was that link to kind of everything we just went through is in that chat box. So I would make yourself familiar with those. Take a look at all of there is to offer, have your partners help you. But lots of good stuff in those links there. And I'm going to pass it back over to Sarah Smith now.
Allie, I advanced too far too quickly. Do you want to talk about the dirt first?
Oh, yeah, I'll talk about the dirt. This is just a plug for our newsletter from USDA, from our Farm to School office. There's a lot of great updates. If there's cool webinars that are happening from either USDA or our partner organizations, really great stories from across the US. Maybe some of you have been in there. But yeah, it's a good one. It's monthly, so it's not gonna muck up your inbox or anything. But yeah, a good one to just get on the listserv for if you so choose.
Thank you. All right, we're going to wrap up and move into some questions and answers here. So be thinking about any questions you might have while we have Allie here to help address those, and Kirsten to talk about her experience as a nonprofit receiving funding. A note before we move into that in 2022, the Nebraska Department of Education, with the funders who you see their or the partners, you see their logos at the bottom of the slide, we were awarded USDA Farm to School grant to develop a statewide network, which has been something that was pinpointed by the legislature as being a high need for Nebraska. And so we took that on, and we are in the process right now of following this timeline for network development. So we've just wrapped up some asset mapping exercises where we hosted meetings virtually and in person to learn about the farm to school activity in Nebraska. And in late spring or late winter and early spring, we'll be doing some regional meetings in person where we're going to brainstorm where the network needs are and where we're headed. So if you'd like to stay engaged in this project and in development of the network, when we'll be kicking it off late next year, then that QR code will take you to a Google form where you can add your information, and you'll be added to our email list for updates as the network project moves forward. So just a quick note about that. And again, I think I've mentioned 3 or 4 different USDA Farm to School grant projects that the state has led. And it's really propelled us forward with farm to school activity in the state. So grateful for the opportunities that these grants provide us, and hopeful that we see a lot of Nebraska applications this year for the farm to school grants, which Allie, you said they are due January 11th, 2024.
The 12th, but I mark it on your calendar as the 11th.
Okay. Kirsten's point, like get in there while you can. Okay, this contact here is directly who you can ask questions that are very specific about the grant to. Allie and I, the NDE Farm to School team, are available to help you think through proposals or questions about Farm to School as a whole. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you have questions now, you are welcome to raise your hand or drop them in the chat box. I think we're pretty safe. If you need to unmute, you could do that and ask your question directly.
Hi, I have a question. Is this farm to school is only for early childhood development and elementary schools, or could you go into high schools, middle schools, things like that?
All ages. Yeah, definitely go into middle school to high school. Yeah, we have a lot of great projects that have been done in middle schools and high schools. So no, definitely not just for elementary or ECE. And I would definitely look if you've got a great project. Again, that list of awardees from the past, I would do a control F for high school, search for some great high school projects out there that have been awarded in the past.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Allie, it looks like we have a question about as far as connecting into producers and agriculture directly, for those that would be applying for the grant, would beef be an allowable product?
Yeah, so with this grant program, this is actually a kind of an important point. The grant can only fund, so 10% of the grant funds can go towards food. And really, so this isn't to supplement, your reimbursement that you're getting for your National School Lunch Program or for your CACFP program. This is more to fund projects, right? So that 10% of funding towards food should really be on taste tests or educational uses of food. If you've got a class going something around nutrition. That said, working with producers around, working with a producer group to get more local beef into schools, that's a great project. I know we've had one that's wrapping up with the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe up in South Dakota, and they were working specifically around getting local bison incorporated into schools and kind of working with the schools to do training around how to cook local meats, because you're not just taking a patty out of a box, but you're working with a raw product. There's training that's needed there. So grant funding could go towards something like that. So just keep that in mind. This isn't to be like this grant program isn't just to buy food, buy local food that can be used in your feeding program. It is meant for a project, but projects around local beef, local meat are great and encouraged. And again, I would look at that past awardee, some of those lists, and do some control F for meat or meat producers, things like that.
Allie, you probably see in the chat that Dixie's point is that they do offer beef in schools in District 145, and they would like to be purchasing more from producers.
Well, I love that thought. And yeah, if there's a project or training needs that you can incorporate it into a project that could work for an application, keep that in mind.
I have a question. Can you refer back to when you were talking about the for-profit entity of a school, a childcare or a preschool elementary program, and talk about what was the eligibility of that again?
So I can't answer specific questions around this because this is a competitive grant and I work for the government.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I refer you to that eligibility section.
Okay.
You can email specific questions to that inbox that was on that last page. They likely will give you a similar answer if we can't answer very specifically, because the nature of this grant is competitive. So we don't want to give anybody an edge We're
Okay.
prohibited from doing so, but look at that section and look at that FAQ document. The FAQ document is really helpful around some of the eligibility questions as well.
Thank you.
Allie, would aquaculture or environmental education, like trout in the classroom, be an eligible activity? And
Yeah.
I think that's also tied into the question of eligible entities, including like a homeschool. So a two-part question there.
Again, with the eligibility, please read that section carefully and look at the FAQ. Again, I'm kind of barred from answering more questions around that. So please look at that eligibility section before writing your entire application. Aquaculture, environmental education, our turnkey track has an entire environmental ag, well, agricultural ag, but environmental ed ties into that. But yeah, those are great activities. And again, I would look at that past list of awardees and kind of do some keyword searching. But yeah, those are great projects. And Jan, the FAQ document is at that grants.gov link that maybe one of the Sarahs or Taylor can drop in the chat. But that will be at the grants.gov under the shared or the related documents. There's a whole list of documents, but the FAQ one is the one you want.
It is a lot of clicking, Allie, to get through that website. So I haven't found the link yet, but Sarah Meyer might. I will say those links that, oh, there we go. Sarah's got it there. The links, we will share it in an email at the end of this week where we'll have this recording available. We'll have the links to these resources available. We'll have the slides available. And then you'll also have our contact information to make it really easy to get in touch with us. Give it another minute here and see if we have any other questions that come to mind.
Kirsten, I think from fiscal year 23, you were the only grantee from Nebraska, correct?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So hopefully, it's great to see so much interest. So hopefully one of you can join Kirsten in the Center for Rural Affairs in bringing in some more grantees from Nebraska.
Okay. Allie, thank you so much for your time for this webinar and making it specific to Nebraska. And we'll be looking forward to seeing if we do have more applicants this next round of funding. Folks, if you have other questions that come to mind after this, please reach out and we will get you connected to the answers. And again, we'll send an email out with all the resources from this webinar today. And I think we will award you back 7 minutes of your day today, and we're closing out a little bit early. Thank you all so much again for joining, and stay in touch.
Thanks for having me.